Hello, everyone, and we're live with the first webinar from Bmetric this year. We have quite a few people registered participating, also some who did it to get the recording afterwards. So I just want to share a little bit of practical information before I dive into the topic of today. If you have any questions, please use the question tab. If you type your question there, I can answer it live here, either talking about it or in the chat. That also means that anyone who might listen to this webinar afterwards will be able to see the question and hear the answer. The topic today is how to connect online and offline user journeys, something we've been working with at Bmetric for the past 12 years. And the general concept haven't really changed, though some of the systems involved has of course developed over the past decade. Let me share a presentation here. So first things first, who is Bmetric? We work with organizations to hit their sales target so that lead generation hit their sales targets. We work with securing marketing budgets through call tracking and personalized forms. And we help organizations reach their service ambitions by personalizing the contact options so that customers doesn't go completely mad in finding the right conversation with the service and support channels. When talking about connecting the online and offline user journey, there are some commercial considerations on the visitor intent, on the channel preferences, on performance measurement, and of course, we can't avoid entirely talking about AI here in 2025. But there's also the technical aspect. There's how you create a feedback loop. There's how you can work with inbound calls in regards to a feedback loop. And then there, of course, how can you validate the changes that you make to such a setup? The commercial considerations. So I think most organizations dream of that they can sell online, that their cross and upsells will happen automatically through online channels. It's cheaper, it's more efficient, it's seen as self-service. But for a lot of organizations, having a safety net of contact options is actually extremely commercially sound. And for some organizations, it's even more valuable selling offline due to the cross and upsell ability or due to complicated products that require some sort of trust with the customer and the organization. And of course, for service, chats or chatbots are the preferred method, again, due to efficiency. But what we see is that it's not quite how visitors actually react. And one of the reasons is, of course, that visitors have different intent when they go to the website. And I think it's important to try and segment why visitors are on your website in the first place. So to try and understand what are visitors actually looking for. Try to divide what kind of job to be done. Why are they on the website in the first place? Is it technical issues with the product that they bought? Is it more administrative issues? They want to change address or name? Or is it because they actually have commercial intent and want to buy something? So what you need to consider when you're working with online visitor intent is basically saying, what kind of data signals do I have available to segment my visitors? And what is my confidence of the assumed intent? Based on that confidence, you can behave more or less aggressively in personalizing that user journey. So if we look at the various or the maturity in the various signals that you can have for the visitor intent, it's where are they on the website? I would say almost all organizations can do that. It comes with a basic analytic package. It's there by default. If you want to be slightly more advanced, you can utilize source information, where a visitor is coming from, what kind of, was it an email newsletter, was it advertisement, was it a service message? And if you're working with customer data platforms or CRM data, then you can actually start communicating and segmenting visitors based on what kind of products they have, what kind of customer are they? Is there even room for upsells? Is there a churn risk? Stuff like that. And that leads us, of course, to the highest maturity in Signal, which is a calculated metric. We calculate that there is X amount of chance that the visitor is interested in buying our service. Each of these maturity levels increase the confidence in visitor intent. But it's really important for me to say here that some segmentation is better than no segmentation. And the reason for that is that a lot of organizations tend to not do segmentation unless they have the most advanced CDP platform available, which is a bit of a mistake. By making simpler segmentation on visitor intent, you're actually able to learn what you need to do with your CDP or with your calculated metrics. If you skip directly to step 3 or 4 here with a CDP, for example, you might actually not be able to operationalize and activate the data from the CDP. So by starting by identifying and measuring intent based on simpler signals and setting up a segmentation based on channels, you will actually be able to harvest much more value when your organization then increases in maturity level. But this goes back to the channel options, because for each of the different jobs to be done, what the organization or business would like the customer to use is not necessarily the same as what the customer prefers to use. And that's why it's worth examining whether there's harmony or contrast between what the customers choose to do and what the organizations present to the customer to do. And then that allows you to evaluate what the company priority is and what the customer preference is. So I like this schematic to highlight that difference and where an organization might need to improve their work. If we take something like an inbound phone call, it might actually be what a lot of customers prefer, so they do it. It might not be what the organization prefer because it's expensive. In that case, there is a contrast between the company and customer preference. There are then different things that you as an organization can consider doing about it. Okay, can we move these contact moments onto, let's say, a chat or a chatbot? But if it's not the customer preference, what can we then do to improve the experience of the customers? But what's even more important is often in large organizations, there is not entirely an agreement about what channels you utilize towards which visitor. And that's why having the actual mapping of what channels are available combined with what the preference from the company is and what the current preference is for the customers. By having such a mapping and by having it shared with the entire organization, you're actually able to start personalizing and segmenting a website or any digital platform by showing only the relevant contact options to the relevant visitor. And that can start very simple on a URL level, or it can be extremely advanced on a calculated visitor level. So by selecting the right channel, by assessing if the organization agrees which channel is the preference, you can start segmenting and communicating that channel to the given visitor. That also allows for a better utilization of website real estate. There's only so much space that you can use on a website when you have a visitor either on mobile phone or on desktop. So you do need to prioritize what kind of call to actions that you utilize towards a visitor, whether it's in a service or a sales situation. And of course, when you then start adjusting the channels, you want to make sure that you have the right KPIs, because you are affecting a lot of money and budget when you are, you can say, manipulating the user journey to where it goes. And you can say some basic tracking or best practice tracking is, of course, the sales effectiveness on the various channels. It's no secret that I am not a big fan of chatbots for sales. I have yet to see a successful situation where a chatbot is able to improve commercial conditions. But of course, other channels, whether it's inbound, outbound, live chat, can be successful. The cost per conversation, because this is the other part. One thing is how good the channel is at selling, but we can't ignore the costs, which is also why in certain situations, having fewer sales might actually make sense simply because of the cost per conversation for that channel. The same goes with volume. I think a mistake that is often made is that from a company perspective, all channels are regarded as the same, and they're not. So what I mean by that is that a visitor who calls might not be able to ask the same question on chat. And here we are talking about accessibility. Some people are dyslexic. They can't just write everything. They prefer to speak, and vice versa. Some people are having anxiety of grabbing the phone and calling. So having certain channels or just communicating that single channel is not the same as that channel instantly being able to take over that volume. And that's why it's so extremely important to measure that volume, how it affects the impact if you start changing what channel. You use redirects. Does the channel actually have first touch resolution? If it doesn't, it becomes even more expensive because you have several contact moments for that given channel. So measuring how many redirects or how much first touch resolution you have on a given channel is actually extremely important in assessing the expense of the channel, because it might be cheaper per conversation, but if it actually doesn't solve the conversation and often escalates to a different channel, the price is much higher. And of course, customer satisfaction. It matters, and sometimes it matters in interesting ways. And what I mean by that is that it's not uncommon to measure, let's say, the net promoter score of visitors having had a chat or a call with an organization. But what we've actually seen is that often the net promoter score on the website is impacted by the outcome of the ability to contact the organization. What happens often is that the customers who had a conversation are happy because the conversation worked good. But the ones who never reached anyone are extremely unhappy, and they're very likely to leave their feedback elsewhere on the website. And that's why it can be extremely important to combine the reviews or the net promoter scores of different channels and not isolate it to one channel, because the performance of each individual channel can actually impact the net promoter score of the other channels. And then it is slightly anecdotal, but what we see is that it's very often quite solid in outbound sales teams, these metrics. It's their bread and butter. But at the same time, it's often non-existent in chat or customer service. And that can be due to systems, it can be due to legacy, but it is a problem. Because when you then want to start assessing if a chat channel performs as well as an outbound or an inbound channel, you actually lack the data set to compare that performance. And then it becomes guesswork instead of data-driven. So I think an extremely important requirement when you start initializing new channels is that the tracking is on par with the most important metrics, so you can actually compare them on a relevant basis. Finally, some commercial considerations on channel is the optimization bias that often happens. It's not the same demographic that uses, let's say, a phone versus a chat versus online purchase. It's not necessarily the same media consumption, and it's not necessarily the same buyer journey. So if you don't measure the outcome offline of an online user journey, you actually miss out on essential data that could have a massive impact on your ad spend, and it could have a massive impact on the website optimization in regards to service. And then I promised some little bit of AI, and it's 2025, and I think we either have had too much of AI or especially DeepSeek conversations. So what I'd like to focus on instead is way more practical. How can you actually use it tomorrow to have a commercial impact on channels if we look online to offline? And what's really important here is that summarizing conversations at scale is now possible. So ever since call center systems have existed, recording phone calls, listening to phone calls have been a thing. It's how you trained your outbound team. It's how the customer service team became better. But when we talk online analytics, listening individually through each of these conversations, it was hard to get an aggregate on what this was actually about. But with AI, you're actually able to summarize and sort what these conversations are about. It's well known, I would say, or very, very used for the past year, maybe year and a half in experimentation when you do online optimization, that you do review mining on external websites where you scrape, sort, and ask an LLM to analyze what kind of topics, positive or negative, that your customers are talking about in order to improve your messaging. And the same with kind of competitor messaging analysis, that you scrape their media, their ads, you do an analysis through LLM, and then you basically get an overview, a summary of what kind of messaging are we up against. But you can actually use it to summarize and sort customer conversations as well, whether it's for sale or service. And we're going to get to that a little bit, the more technical aspect of connecting the online and offline journey. But when you do that, then you're actually able to optimize the website, optimize your ad spend based on what the sales conversations were about, based on what the service conversations are about. And ever since we started Bimetric, we always advocated for organizations to actually listen in their call center when optimizing their service pages online. What we tend to see is that it becomes a design exercise online with anecdotal or very little experience from the offline service department. But if you actually use the service information, you can create a much better online self-service page as well, because you can actually use the direct feedback that the visitors are giving in their conversations. What is it they don't understand? What is it they're not doing? That you can then actually utilize online. And with AI, it's possible at scale. And that's the big difference. Now you can actually do this, and you can't do this tomorrow. However, you wanna be a little bit careful with your legal team. So don't share data that you shouldn't share. Make sure that you use a model that is approved by your legal team. Make sure that you use a model that does not share data that it shouldn't. So consider if you have a local model you can use, if you have existing call center functionality that already records calls where you can utilize an LLM to do this sort of analysis, or make sure that the privacy and data sharing is in order before doing this. It's extremely effective, but of course it requires compliance. Before we head into the technical tracking considerations, I just want to take a short time to ask if there's any questions for the commercial considerations or something that should be elaborated. It doesn't seem like it. Then we'll continue with the more technical considerations. And that is all about creating a feedback loop. And this is where many organizations start struggling, because it becomes an extremely abstract exercise across many systems. We're used to, in the online journey, in the online tracking, that certain organizations had a keen interest in making it as simple as possible. That's, of course, Google. That means that without any technical savvy, you can set up tracking, you can send that data to improve your advertisement and online performance. For offline user journeys, it is slightly more complicated. However, it is actually very similar to more modern server-side tracking or similar that a lot of organizations are working towards. What we're looking for is that the online behavior that results in a lead can be stitched with the outcome of the lead so that we can create an optimization that can be used to affect the online behavior. And when I say lead, that's of course the positive scenario, the commercial scenario. But it could also be a contact moment in a service situation where you have an online behavior that leads to a service contact which is not wanted, where you want to understand why did it happen in the first place, so you can create an optimization so you can change the online behavior to reduce that contact. Ultimately, what you're looking for, of course, is to be able to create that feedback loop that allows you to get the sales leads that you want while avoiding the contact moments that you don't. When it all starts at the website, you have a visitor going on the website, and at that point, various tracking systems will assign that user a visitor ID. I'm going to use the abstract term because that allows the same concept regardless of what system you use. Whether it is Google Visitor IDs, Click IDs, Adobe User IDs, Pivik User IDs, doesn't really matter. Conceptually, they all work the same. A user ID is assigned to the visitor when they go to the visitor website. That needs to be stitched with the offline action. That means that the moment that the visitor starts the action of initiating contact to the offline, let's say, call center, you need to save that meta information. What visitor is this? So you can transfer that ID into the offline system so you can have the outcome. What can be a little tricky here is that sometimes the outcome system is not the same that receives the lead in the first place or the contact moment in the first place. But we will dive into that in a moment. Because when you then have the online visitor ID, you can match that with the offline performance. Basically, it's a very simple equation of having online ID plus online behavior sent to the offline system, where you then have the online visitor ID plus the outcome. In all of this, it's about looking for a key, and that key is what complicates the matter a bit. But uploading then allows to add by. So we can take this user journey, the most simple setup, which is an online form. In that case, a visitor goes to the website, they are assigned a visitor ID, and they use a form. When that form is sent, whether it's as simple as email or API, you make sure that there's a meta field that identifies this transaction so that the visitor ID can be identified with the online user journey. Let's say it's a CRM that receives the contact. When the outcome of the conversation, let's say it's a sale, is registered in that CRM, you are able to take that meta information of what the online user ID was and upload and stitch that into the system. In the case of Google Ads, it could be the Click ID that is sent along with the form. Where it becomes slightly more complicated is in a scenario where you don't have a form that can immediately harvest or register the meta information of the online user journey. That's the case on an inbound phone call. That's the case on a chat or a chatbot, because they need to actively scrape or harvest the online user ID so that they can make the data stitch. I'm going to show an example with how you can do it with phone calls. A visitor goes to your website, and in this case, you will have to use something like call tracking so that you have a unique phone number per visitor, so that you know that the visitor who called this unique phone number is connected to a specific online user journey. You then basically have two options. Either you can do an API lookup in the call tracking system where you say, this phone call, did it originate from the website? If it did, can you give me the, in the case of Google Ads, Google Click ID, so that I can upload the outcome to this Click ID. So basically, the user goes to the website, they make a phone call, the call tracking system registers the online user ID and that a phone call happened, and the CRM system registered the phone number, which is then used to make a lookup so that you can get the Google Click ID. And with the Click ID, you can then upload the outcome of the call into Google Ads. But it can be the same process that you can use a CDP. Let's say you're running a customer data platform or CRM. They have a visitor and a session ID on the website. The moment they make a phone call, you can register that this phone call happening at this time is connected to this online user journey. When the call the outcome is then registered, you can make a lookup where you say, this phone call did originate from the website. If it did, please give me the online ID so that you can stitch the outcome with the online user journey. The same concept if you have a chat or a chatbot. The moment a visitor initiates a conversation, you need to register the online visitor ID together with the conversation, so that when you have the outcome of the conversation, that it can be basically connected with the online user journey. The secret here in these feedback loops is identifying the key that goes through systems. When working with phone, whether it's inbound or outbound, a really good key is the phone number. If you want to make it more precise, you can use phone number and timestamp. But with chats, it can be a session ID. In the Adobe world, you work a lot with something called transaction ID. Conceptually, transaction ID is a very solid method where you say this specific transaction is connected to a very specific user. So you can always upload an outcome to a specific transaction. The secret here when trying to optimize this online to offline user journey is looking at the systems involved and identifying which key is a part of the process that allows you to link each part of the process. So if it's a world where you have the website, you have Google Ads or CDP, you have the call center system, and then maybe you have a CRM or a subscription system where the results are registered. At that point, you want to make sure that each of these systems have access to the key that you need to stitch. It could be a phone number. That phone number is available in the call center system receiving the call. That phone number is also available in the CRM. What tends to happen is that each of these systems are built individually without considering that a connection needs to be made. So therefore, it could be a situation where in the CRM system, you are registering a phone number that the customer communicates instead of the phone that they actually use. Let's say that there are several mobile phones in use or similar by a household. So what you want to make sure is that the field that you use as a key that needs to be available in each of these systems is kind of locked by the systems involved, or if it's self-registered, that they are properly communicated what needs to be registered. Otherwise, the link is lost. Using concepts like a transaction ID is also extremely solid because it works more generically. It works whether it's a form, whether it's a phone call, whether it's a chat, whether it's a chatbot, but it basically allows saying any sort of contact needs a transaction ID. And whenever you communicate between systems, we use this transaction ID as a key to upload and stitch the data. We cannot avoid the stitching of data when we work with a true one-to-one online to offline user journey. And you want to make sure that you use a data key that is preferably as metadata as possible so that you are not reliant on data filled out by the customer. And that is because you often have different kinds of needs. If we look at a customer service scenario where they make an inbound phone call, you will not have an email. So you cannot use the marketing automation email as the key. If you use the phone number, you cannot use that for a chat where you might not have the chat. You simply just don't ask the customer for having the phone number. So in those scenarios, identifying a key that can work across systems could be in more advanced organizations, a CDP, visitor ID, but it could also be something like a transaction ID or a form of key that you agree on in the organization. Without a doubt, the simplest keys to work with are the ones that will always be there in a given scenario. In an inbound phone call, the customer's phone. In an email marketing automation world, the email. In a chat, you can use the same as the form with some sort of directly using the online transaction key. Is there any questions regarding creating this feedback loop or comments from anyone? No. Then we'll continue to one of my important, let's call it pet peeves, which is to validate changes. I think that one of the misunderstood aspects of conversion rate optimization is that it's there primarily to increase revenue, which it is, but is also there to prevent loss of revenue. That means that experimentation is equally important in scenarios where you want to avoid making a change that actually has a negative impact on your website. That can be a scenario where you are generating leads and sales through a certain channel. You switch to another channel, suddenly the volumes are different, suddenly the amount of sales are different. It can also be adding contact options to different departments, and suddenly the experience is that there's an overload or there's a mismatch between the capacity of those channels. So I'd say the most common scenarios these days is the setup of a chatbot to handle service, taking over real estate from commercial intent, or it is some sort of digital transformation where you want more online self-service and where the online user journey does not fully take over the lost commercial success of the offline channels. Tracking these things allows to actually identify it and compare it to the commercial KPIs that we discussed earlier. It allows to assess that maybe we lost 2% of our sales, but it's actually okay because the sales we have now are cheaper. Or we have eliminated 30% of our leads. That does not work for us. We need to switch to a different approach. So validating changes becomes extremely important when you want to identify how the channel utilization changes. And of course, it requires that you have the feedback loop. But when you do, you are actually able to validate the impact. You can also start experimenting when you have the various channels. And that goes back to the customer preference, company preference, because you might not hit the perfect preference in the first go, but that doesn't mean you can't iterate and change it along the way. And by looking at the incremental improvements and rollout, you will actually be able to transform how the various channels are used. But it does require validating the changes. And finally, of course, a reminder, when you work with these items, it's extremely important to consider consent and privacy mode. My personal opinion is that if visitors don't want you to track, don't track them, but it doesn't mean that you can't interact with them. What that means is that you can't use data points that you would use in a consent situation to segment or personalize what you do to each visitor. But it does allow you to make a translation that fits better into a privacy world. So what we often see is that some sort of segmentation, even though it's way simpler and it is privacy compliant, is better than no interaction or no segmentation at all. That was all from me today, but I would allow a little bit of room if anyone had any questions or something that requires clarification. No? Then with that, I'll say thank you for today. This recording will be available right after the end of this session. And then, of course, if you have any follow-up questions, you are welcome to reach out and talk to me afterwards. We'll have more webinars coming up. Next one, we're going to focus on CDP and activating a CDP. It's something we encounter with a lot of our customers and talk to a lot of organizations about. Can be difficult to implement, difficult to activate. So we're going to have a discussion on how to improve and actually get that going. Thank you for today.